Okay. We ready? Ooh. We ready to go? I'm looking at Harry. Hurrah! Welcome, everyone. What an amazing group of people and what an amazing turnout. So I'm Jess, I work for Lighthouse, and it is such an honor and such a pleasure to be here hosting this evening to celebrate the fantastic debut collection of poetry from Alizia Per Mohammed. So reading this collection, it was one word really in particular among many that struck me, and that was patience. It feels like an incredibly patient kind of work, which at the same time is fierce, and it pulls you back in again and again and again, and I absolutely loved it. So I'm really looking forward to getting to chat to Alizia a little bit about it in a bit. But first, we're going to start the evening off with some guest poets. Woo! So we've got two guests today, and then we will hear a little bit from the actual collection, from Another Way to Split Water, and then we'll talk a little bit about it. So that's the sort of the layout of the evening. And of course, afterwards, please have your books signed. You can get it from over there. That's kind of our till this evening. And also eat cupcakes. There are cupcakes with a tiny cover from the book on them, and drinks and so forth. So I'm going to start by introducing our first guest poet, who is the wonderful human Andres and Ordorica. Woo! So for those of you who aren't aware yet, and you're in for a treat of Andres' work, Andres Ordorica is a queer Latinx writer based in Edinburgh. His writing attempts to map the journey of his diasporic experience and unpack what it means to be from ni de aquí ni de allá. His debut poetry collection, At Least This I Know, which you can also purchase, right? Is published with 404 Inc. So huge round of applause for Andres.
Hello, everyone. It's so lovely to be here and see so many people here supporting Alicia's poetry debut. It's such an honor to share space with her and with Cynthia tonight. Alicia has been a huge supporter of mine and just created so many spaces that have allowed Black and POC writers to come together in Scotland. If you don't know, among many accolades of doing a PhD, Alicia also co-founded the Scottish BPOC Writers Network, and that's how we came into friendship. So I tried to find water poems, or poems that deal with blue, for tonight's readings. As you can tell, my collection is very orange, but yeah, so that's sort of the vibe of tonight. My first poem for you is called Mother in the Community Pool. Mother rests on an inflatable donut. Her fair skin deepens in the afternoon sun. She likes the water, is a water baby, but is of the desert. Mother ducks under the surface, chemical golden, hair floating like tentacles atop the glassy chlorinated plain, until all of her is submerged. Mother exists in all my stories, her dreams that never came to be, her words hidden within me. I write her into metaphor, make her heroine, mermaid, a mortal being. Mother, she splashes me playfully before drying off to have a rest, lies recumbent on a plastic lounger, curls splayed, soft and shiny all around her. Mother. Thank you. My next poem is very blue because the title is Bottled Blue, and it's sort of an ode to my love of the color blue. I want to bottle blue, capture it in its breezy and effortless hue, take it with me on long journeys. I want that color to anoint me, wash me in Florida water, like chrism on my baptism day, cradled in my father's arms over the font. That color follows me around like a phantom balloon whose helium never dies, long string tied to finger, a reminder. 29 years around the sun, and that color never gets old, even if I do, bright as ever and still moving. It lives in the sky, the sea, mighty ocean. Blue can transport me back to happier times, can evoke feeling through memory, can transcend a lifetime. When you look up at the sky, untainted by clouds or rain, do you ever wonder, why does blue mean sad? For me, it means renewal, it means rebirth. Blue is redemption. Yes, I long to bottle blue. Keep it safe forever until the day I need to share with you some happiness. Blue will be tied around my neck, wearing it like an amulet. I'll cross myself in its salvation. Blue, the holiest of colors. Thank you. This next poem is about Unrequited Love from a man I met many years ago during another global pandemic, during swine flu. And we met at an airport. And the writer in me decided to make up an entire story about him. So this is Newark Liberty International Airport. In a departure lounge in the state of New Jersey, the least beautiful one, that's where I first saw you. You were older than me, with beautiful blue eyes lined with circles like a trunk of sequoia. Your name Adam, meaning to be red, meaning to make, made from dirt. Like the first man Adam, my first man Adam, my man-made fantasy. While the plane taxied, you asked me questions of my travels to come, while I made up our story, blurring our present and future with memories of your hands, tracing our timeline together, tracing the outline of our love. I dreamt of our first good morning as the sun rose above the Pacific, as the sun shone brightly on your face, as I imagined you kissing me. We talked between the midnight hours over a meal which I could not say was breakfast or dinner, but would be our first together. At the baggage carousel, I would bump into you, tired but still enamored, happy to see your familiar face. I would want to be braver, want to invite you to my room, want to feel your hands span the time zones of my body. But I'd simply say goodbye as you kissed me on the cheek and wished me well, waving me off into the ether. You see, I once met an Adam seated next to me on a plane, introduced myself to him, did nothing to become his Eve. Thank you. This is my penultimate poem. It's a short one. I was very fortunate in 2021, yes. No, 2020, oh God, to have received a second life grant from the Edwin Morgan Trust to celebrate Morgan's centenary. I'm a very big fan of Morgan as a queer poet living in Scotland. I feel a deep kinship with him. This was very bold of me. I decided to write my own take on strawberries. So this is Fresas after Edwin Morgan. Fresas not diced, not quartered, simply destemmed. Washed first, patted dry, primavera en la boca, mayo en la lengua, aftertaste of joy. No need to wash the plates in the middle of a storm. All right, this is my last poem for you. This is my take on bodies of water in my very orange way. This is Neroli Kiss. They say iron girders dyed the river orange, the one we sailed down that Indian summer. My hand scooped up clementine water only to find it was me who was colored that apricot pink. But still I supped the mystic drink. While sailing down the river, my mind went with the currents, and I turned to you full of wonder, sun-stroked, open-mouthed to ask, Do you ever stop to think how water might have linked our dual bodies, coral springs, Venetian seas, salmon riverbeds, the Ganges, Rio Grande, the Don, or Dee, or somewhere in between? My mind poured out like a broken dam, overflowing onto our afternoon. Do you ever dream about a life in which we never met, or wonder what would be had I not traversed the sea? I hope you never ask these questions. But you smiled and continued rowing towards something I did not know. I looked to the city's riverbank, watching couples promenade arm in arm, and thought of that day, your lilted tongue, each turn a phrase capturing my attention along the Thames. On the Clyde, I cupped my hands in holy consecration, offering you a drink. You turned to me mischievous and said, they say iron girders once dyed the river orange, but I understood it to be myth. Still, when I kissed your lips, a rusty, neroli aftertaste lingered on my tongue, and in your eyes, I realized it was the sun that was our constant, the very thing we both orbited all those years until our final first kiss. There was a copper memory I left behind as we continued sailing down the Clyde. Perhaps I'll return to it in the future and find the blood orange taste awaiting me. From the banks I might see two lovers sailing down the tangerine stream, and when I do, I'll wash in its blessed blossom lock and think of you. Thank you.
Like we're keeping that chair warm for each other. Before we introduce our next poet, just those of you who came a wee bit late, feel free to take up some seats in the back, because there are some free seats, I have been told. I haven't checked. Welcome, welcome. Brilliant. So thank you so much for that. That was amazing. So our next poet, our next lovely guest is Cynthia Miller, who is a Malaysian-American poet, festival producer, and strategist living in Edinburgh. Her debut collection, Honorifics, which is also there, was shortlisted for the Laurel Prize, the Seamus Heaney Prize, and the Forward Prize for Best First Collection. Her poems have appeared in the Rialto, Ambit, the Telegraph, and Poetry Birmingham Literary Journal. A huge round of applause for Cynthia Miller.
Thanks so much. It's such a joy to be reading and celebrating your book. Alicia is such a brilliant poet and lovely human and such a good member of poetry community, so I'm really, really honored to be reading. I also picked out all my best water poems. This first one is actually inspired by a collaborative poem that Alicia and I wrote, I think in the first lockdown, May 2020. So this is, it feels very special to be reading this with you. Abridged Dictionary for Water Babies. Fir. Pine honey is salt sap, bark treacle, sharper and greener and colder than anything collected from inland hives. Fish. When I said I hated seafood, my mother said, like hell, and brought me to the market until I learned to love it, even at 3 a.m., learned to love the tuna fillets like huge horse hearts kicking over, halibut joeys hollered hello, those little chits and the old-fashioned scales, loved the watchful hum of warehouse lights, this bright knot of sea at the dark margin of a sleeping city. Moon. Jellied fish eye, prized delicacy, unblinking above dark cliffs. Salt, salt-lined, salt circle, salt crust, salt glaze, salt water. Selkie, I am forever half one thing, half something else. If I chanted lissome like a spell enough times, I could wriggle into it like a nylon dress. I am wringing out my skin until the whole house smells like engine oil, seaweed, a promise, tomorrow. Venus. Lisa stepped out in a gold sequin swimsuit like a rock star. Where do you even get a suit like that? She even brought an inflatable scallop shell. Everything matched: her sun-lightened curls, glitter nails, glitter sunglasses. We sat around like lesser nymphs in our plain wetsuits. It was like looking straight into the sun, and she goddamn knew it. Water. Even as we were in it, we longed to be in it, forever sculling between shadows and the ocean floor, dropping away into dark blue, sea greedy, or weird tan lines or vaselined armpits. All summer long, the small boat of my heart takes on water. Another lockdown poem. Social distancing. It was the epoch of transmutation. Some evenings the neighbors turned into jaguars and dragged their dinner up into the trees. You could touch anything you wanted and watch it change. A bench became a hammerhead shark. Confetti became slices of wet ham. A post box, a baby grand piano. Where town hall once stood, now was a giant baklava oozing honey. Someone turned their arm into long tentacles of squirming fingers and went trawling, terrorizing the streets by grasping everything in reach. We were afraid to venture out of our homes. Everything became a record of what we touched or hadn't, where our hands lingered or didn't, how much distance we could afford to put between ourselves and others, what it cost us, what it didn't. I think it was only going through preparing poems for this set that I was like, I feel like there's a lot of water, shared water imagery here. Summer preserves Haibun. Thinking about pickling dark strips of stars and preserving them in vinegar. By the end of the day, every point of light small as a pink peppercorn, ready to be scooped at with fingers and eaten whole. By the end of the week, a galaxy of jars lighting up my pantry, each hand-labeled. First night in Crete, full moon marmalade, the harbor with Venus in distance, best before December. The kitchen humming like a Geiger counter, piccalilli ticking. I swam for miles that summer, relished the sour pull of my shoulders as I carved through salt water with just my arms, rarely kicking, preserving my energy for the way back. After the storm, the ferry was cleared for travel, carrying long life goods and a memory of heat for winter. I think I have time for maybe 2 more poems. This next poem is called Sayang Sayang. It's a Malay word that has a multitude of meanings. Noun, love. I have lived with this word for 28 years, and only now is it taking root in my mouth. See also, beloved, sweetheart. Noun, waste. The thought of throwing food away. The last bite of beef noodles gone rubbery and cold. Go on, don't make me save it. See also, regretful loss. Noun, pity. All this fruit left on the branch, steeping in its own rot. Who knows how long we have before a plastic bag of windfall rambutans turns into sweet slop. See also, we'll eat it anyway. Yes, darling, my dearest. Love is always dear. Love is never a waste. Love is eating scraps for fear of waste. Love is chiding you to finish your plate. Love, eat up love. What a pity, such a shame to waste love. Love how much we've wasted. I'll end with this poem that closes the book, and this is based on a true story. Voicemails from my mother. An old story, one you know. Once a snake ate my cat, so my second brother killed it and made snake ball soup for the whole family. Maybe next time our table will be bigger. Next time, a snake big enough to feed the street. Remember, I taught you which palms to drink from, how to pinch thin moons of dough around the filling. I am running out of time to tell you everything. I can't, for the life of me, remember what I called to say. Don't be stupid, no one died of homesickness. What a waste a one-way ticket would be. Sayang, I'm sorry if I woke you up. Sayang, everything here tastes different. Missy brought her youngest daughter to lunch today. You know Isabel, the one at Yale. And she reminded me so much of you. Or perhaps you are still that way. I thought I'd spend a year here, but fruit trees take a year to yield anything. I'm going out to the field today. The light is doing something new, and it's time for planting. Sayang, everything that's dead is just fertilizer. All I need, I can carry in my hands. I liked me best when I chose to leave, what I took with me, who I left, there at the border, squinting a little, raising a hand. Thank you.
Okay, now it is time to hear some poems from Another Way to Split Water. So let's just give another huge round of applause for Alizia Pir Mohammed.
Thank you so much. And thank you, Jessica, Cynthia, and Andres, for being here at this side of the room to celebrate with me. And thank you for everyone on that side of the room for being here to celebrate with me. Actually, as I was sitting in that kind of hidden table over there and watching people come in, I was like, wow, I know all of these faces. So it's so nice to be just with friends. And so when I was putting together my poems, they are also all water poems. But I was thinking, I'm just going to read my favorite poems or poems that I like because everyone here I trust, and I'm not going to think about the performance of it or whatever else. I'm just going to read stuff I like because you're all friends. And I also want to say hi to the people online because I think some friends and family are there watching. So yeah, and thank you for being here. I kind of lied. There's one poem that I was a little strategic about, and it's the first one I'm going to read because it's also my dad's birthday today. So I'm going to start off with the father poem, and then I'll just, which, I like this poem too. I shouldn't just say, then I'll go into my favorite poems. But yeah, there's a few family poems in here, and so yeah, I'll dedicate this one to my dad. Happy birthday, Dad. House of Prayer. I walk into the beads of 33 alhamdulillahs. I walk into my childhood mouth, repeat alhamdulillah. 4 decades ago, Father too walked into this prayer, his body nested in the oblong bowing, his alhamdulillah humming deep until it matched the scale of the engine. It was during that first crossing from one alhamdulillah to another home that my father crushed open the chasm he has since passed down to every poem I write. The hollow, the forgotten Quran lodged deep in the night of an unopened drawer. My quest to belong, alhamdulillah, forgive me, forgive me. I praise once again. I symmetry like the wings of a migrating bird. I repeat alhamdulillah and rinse and repeat and rinse and repeat like the rock of an egret. I hold this tasbih to count my alhamdulillahs 33 times, 99 times. The key is to walk again and again into the holy, repeating alhamdulillah, alhamdulillah, alhamdulillah until the skyward calm. Father, what did you hope for when you uttered alhamdulillah? When you whisked over the Atlantic in that giant bird, when the egg cracked open and the yolk of alhamdulillah spilled onto a new coast? Was it traveling homeward or away from homeland? I have learned that alhamdulillah does not resemble a border, but is a house of its own. Alhamdulillah glints beyond language. Praise be to God. My Western tongue holds the syllables, unhooks the praise in my own last name, Hamed. Always I recite alhamdulillah. Endearments. This is a love poem, not a water poem. I have itemized your oak, leaf, long, limb, wild, and have begun to name you things like summer eclipse in my offline calendar, or even sleeping under the stars in a Walmart parking lot. And honestly, that kind of romance is okay with me because secretly, I have also named you River of Pine and Blossoming Spring Flower along the path to Mount Yamnuska. There is also your skin and my skin. There is also the way skin and skin are two vastly different things that this language has difficulty capturing. Every constellated mole and pillar of dark shade, how all of these names describe the way we coexist and exist within one another, the way you disappear into the trees, and I follow. This next poem has an epigraph by Edward Glissant, and it goes, "What kind of river then has no middle? Midnight vessel across the great sea. Another bloom after the first bloom. Inheritance is a form of second sight. In the past, someone with my birthmarks predicted the next moon, the upheaval, my own ebb. My body is the echo of her I ams, a tradition that sieves right through my ancestors' thread. I am slick with rosewater and cat's eye. I can't choose between survival or pleasure. In the past, someone who looked like me fell into a valley of roses 5 times a day. This echo is another velvet petal submerged in the drool of my mouth. I am submerged in the drool of her mouth. My second sight is an heirloom, a volume of sonnets passed down, a line of flight as if she is more image than intent, more midnight than syllable, the I before the I, the root beneath my poem. I am a remembrance, and she is my volta. An echo blooms. This echo is her hair parting into my hair. She is the fine dark strand across my memory. She glides like a reed, a silhouette of green across the great sea. Her poetry strikes through my window like a stone breaking the skin, memory of water. This poem was written, this is kind of, I guess, a lockdown poem. It was written during, I guess, lockdown, really early lockdown, when I was writing a lot about Loch End Park, because I was visiting Loch End Park a lot. So it's called Meditation While Plaiting My Hair. I part my hair straight down the middle, a river on either side. In the past, someone shaped like me poured water from a metal carafe straight into my mouth, the echo of my river submerged in your river. Lately, I read about storms all night because there is no lightning here. Instead, I see the wind pull down the tautness of trees and the swans at the lagoon part through the wreckage. Each one is another translation for love, if love was more vessel than loose thread. Once, we sat poolside outdoors in Dar es Salaam, and I chose survival over your body. Why is it I only ever see the night heron alone? I braid neatly together my hair soaked by salt and the moss of a body I do not touch, the spine of a book left open on the page I forgot to bookmark, the spine of a book I left out in a storm, each of its rooms sliding into our margins, into all these tendrils of blank space. Tell me, when did I let us splinter? And I'm going to end on a poem that has a very similar title to my book. Not the title poem. That one has way too much pressure put on it, so I'm going to read something different. The Fish That Halved Water. Dusk meets water, meets the history of my eye. I walk into the water. I walk into the shimmering body of a fish as the rivers rinse and monsoon knot my memory. It is already night, and all I have learned is the past is a version of this earth where few things have a name. I glide my way through the anonymity of ghosts. This is the landmark of ruins I have become, a woman following every weaving hush, every tendril of water in search of a true story. Listen, I expected the Atlantic to show me all that ruptured when woman after locust crossed an ocean. There are too many names for canyon, and every day I hold those distances in my mouth, all the kilometers my longing has traveled. In the middle of the night, I walk right into my dreams and cluster with the other lost sisters of the moon, our bodies blushing out from the forest's velour. In the middle of the night, I walk right into a dream where the grass pickerel scissor through my every plot of land. The thing about being halved is all the loose ends will sneak up on you, whether you're slicing Zimbaru or dragging a toboggan up a hill, threading in and out of the evergreens as you climb. There are too many ways to say cleave, because one day I'll split into myth and pass through the mouths of 100 generations. I am woman after spooling woman, ensorcelled by water that twins and fissures and halves into worlds. Thank you so much.
Shall we have a seat?
Thank you.
This is so exciting. Thank you. Feels like such a treat to get to sit here and talk to you a little bit about the poems. I was thinking that, some of you are kind of sitting holding the book, and it's so great when you've read a book and you've underlined certain bits, and then you read those bits and you're like, oh.
I picked the good one.
Yeah. It's like when you've asked for a song to be played or something, which is fantastic. And actually the last poem that you read had one of those lines in it, which I wonder if maybe that's where we could start talking about them. It was the line about the problem of being halved and all the loose threads that come sneaking up on you. It's not paraphrasing your own poetry. So.
I think you got it almost exactly right.
And obviously there's so many images of halving and being halved and splitting, and the very cover of the book is halved, and there's the image of the hair being split. And what I just love about that is that throughout the collection, it keeps being problematized, I suppose, and it keeps being kind of questioned, halves are never equal parts, and in terms of identity, they're always splintered into smaller bits. So I wondered if we could start talking about how that idea of being halved, how it made its way into the collection and how it became such a central part of the book.
Yeah, that's a good question. Thank you so much. What's really great is a lot of people in this room have seen my poetry for a long time. And you'll probably know, or maybe you'll remember that this idea of halving and splitting has always been there. And I don't think I really noticed how much until I was putting together these collections of poetry. And I think it came from, in the past, wanting to feel some sense of wholeness, whether that's, due to migration and, my background and moving and being transient across space and never feeling like I quite fit in or belonged anywhere. And I think that's where it started. And then I like that you use the word problematized, because I think that's true. I think I'm now thinking more about, what are the loose threads that come with that? I'm quite interested in exploring those, and what is the connotation of feeling split versus feeling whole versus feeling doubled, because I play a lot with doubling as well. And I don't know if that complexity is something now that I want to interrogate rather than love. I want to kind of love that idea of, all these different parts that are coming together while acknowledging that they have been felt. Like I can't pretend I didn't ever feel them. So yeah, I think I like that it's problematized in this collection. I think that's true, and I think that it's a complicated thing that I'll probably continuously write about forever. Really, sorry guys.
I mean, I'm glad, because I think a lot of us who, have, like you were saying, migration in our backgrounds, and it's like it never ends. The splitting is continuous, I think. I wanted to ask you about one of the many bodies of water that are in the collection, and which you actually, I think, mentioned twice in the poems that you read, which is the Atlantic.
Mm-hmm.
Just because, I don't know, I feel like, and maybe this is the case for you as well, it is such a kind of mythical space, I suppose, in terms of personal mythology, but also in terms of like in a broader way. So yeah, what does it mean for you, like in your writing, but also in maybe the writing of others, and in the works that have kind of gone into this book or inspired you in the past?
Oh, that's a really good question. I think in terms of specifying the Atlantic, it came from sort of real life, like real stories of crossings in my past, in my like family's past, and the idea of like crossing the sea and what that means, and which sea was being crossed, and what is the direction of travel. Well, the direction of travel always seems to be, one way rather than another. And so I was quite curious to explore that. But I think, I think it also comes with where you have like lived and where you've experienced things. And I write about the ocean in lots of, like I write about the Pacific Ocean too, and I think there is something kind of like there's a mythology associated with the water and the sea and the greatness of that, and how it can make you feel separated, but also connected. And I think when you write about the Atlantic, you're writing about, there's always going to be like an echo of something quite painful there as well, in terms of how the crossings, whether they were forceful or not. So I think that's where the Edward Glazan quote came from as well, in terms of the Atlantic being sort of that kind of abyss, and where, it has like a painful history too, which Claudia Rankine writes a lot about, which I would recommend too. Yeah.
Did you find yourself kind of going to the Atlantic in your reading at all, any point while you were writing the book?
Like visiting physically, or just
in your reading, as in like reading about it in different ways.
I suppose in many, like I think the poems that specifically mention the Atlantic were born from like a trip that I took with my father to Dar es Salaam, and I think that when I think about the way that he arrived in Canada and the way that we went to like Dar es Salaam, I think of like that always seemed to be whether it's like an imagistic space or like a different kind of space other than like a physical space, which it also is, it always seemed to be present there in the journey. Like you can't, like it, when I thought about that journey, it was always part of it. So I think that's kind of how it emerged in the work. Was from that, and funnily enough, that actual physical crossing that was made.
I mean, there's so much going on, I feel, with that tension between, which kind of goes into the idea of like an ocean as well, and a crossing, of fluidity and containment. If the splittings never end, then how do you sort of even begin to talk about them, right? Which kind of brings us into, the form and the shape of the poems, which I'm really curious to hear you talk about. Like how does form, if at all, help you give shape to the sort of endless fluidity of identity and of experience?
I think form is really so I think I'm always sort of thinking about content and form and how they balance each other. And I've stopped thinking about it this way as much as before, but sometimes I would be like, what am I going to do where I'm emphasizing sound versus like maybe like a literal meaning, or line breaks where I'm emphasizing form rather than a little literal meaning. But then I think I've moved towards thinking how they complement each other, rather than feeling like I have to choose one. And so I think the forms in this collection are trying to capture that, in terms of, you know, some of the poems themselves are kind of splitting, or there's gaps in the poems that gap can take up so much space. It could be the amount of space it takes to read through the gap when you're reading the poem, but it could also hold so much more in it, in terms of what is being like, what has been lost, or what is being reclaimed, or what is unsaid, or what is said by being unsaid. So I think it just kind of, yeah, like in that way, there's like spaces or breaths in the poem that can offer more, in terms of that fluidity or of like lack of containment. But one thing that I've noticed is I really, really like couplets a lot. There's like a lot of couplets in this book, but I think that's because they give room. They have like so much space associated with them, and you can really move from one, like you can end a couplet and you can move somewhere else because there is that break, and they feel like less rich. I feel like they feel like they have more movement within them too. So.
Is there anything to do with safety in there? Like, does form give you any kind of safety? Or
yeah, I think in general, when you can shape something, there's like some sort of, I might be taking this in a different way, but there's some sort of control there where you get to you allow something to happen, or you allow the thought to go somewhere, and you can shape it through the form of the poem, or you can feel held in the things that you end up saying or kind of withdrawing away from, as well. And then there's also like, if you choose to write some forms that are a little more rigid, like I do have a ghazal. That's the first poem I read was a ghazal. You're kind of led into a certain rhythm or a certain kind of weight of the poem, and I think that's that sort of cements some kind of that kind of leads into what you might be able to say or how much you can say, as well.
Well, that kind of makes me think of something else as well, which is, you mentioned being held, and I was going to say that there is prayer in the collection, both, sometimes like explicitly, but also just in terms of like a certain sacredness or a certain praise. So I wondered, what's the relationship, if at all, between like praise and sacred things and poetry for you?
Oh,
just a little question.
Yeah. I think that's such a good question, because there is that poem that I read initially that incorporates prayer in it, and then once you do that, and then you all have perhaps a copy of the book, and it does become sort of in a weird way an object. But also I think that poetry for me has been a way to always like question, or learn or love. Like I think I've really grown to love the complications that come through, and so that also, like that sort of sense of ritual of expression as well feels sacred, especially because I do find myself thinking about prayer and religion and my relationship with religion, being as one of the sort of things I orbit around no matter what I'm writing about, and it's part of who I am. So it's sometimes, so even though it feels like, sometimes I often have that kind of complicated thought of, there is a prayer in this poem, and it's recited like a prayer in the ghazal, for example. But then I think, okay, that's so ingrained in who I am, and how could I not put it in something I love so much, like poetry? So I think it does come from a place of like tenderness and care.
I definitely think it comes through, absolutely. Like, and I think regardless of whether you see it as a religious kind of sacredness, or as a broader kind of sacredness, more as a like this matters hugely and is kind of very close to me. I think that like I feel that as a reader when I'm reading the poems. Absolutely. I have another question, but I am going to sort of prepare in case anyone else has questions for Alizia, so that we can end on them. So, you know, make them ready in your lovely brains. My last question was, there's this bit, and I can't remember which poem it is in now. It's underlined in my copy, which is somewhere. It's about that there's ethics to remembering, which I thought was like, oh, this is really interesting. And I wondered, did you have to work out any kind of ethics of remembering whilst you were writing your book?
Yeah, definitely. I write a lot about. So that poem is interesting because it's writing about an event. So it's the After the House of Wisdom poem, and so it's writing about in the 1200s, the Grand Library of Baghdad was destroyed, and all the books were thrown into the river, and then I think in the Tigris River, and so that's quite a like painful thing to think about in terms of all this destruction. And so how do we, in that particular poem, how do we remember that and put it into our art in this sense, without just like, I guess without like just using it for the sake of creating something in a sort of selfish sort of way. And I think that's always something when I write about anything that's maybe along the lines of poetry of witness in any kind of way, I'll always be thinking about, and I think it's important to think about that. And so I think in that poem, that came up through the exact sort of specific moment that was being addressed. But I think one thing that comes up in a lot of conversations that I've had with a lot of people, probably in this room, is about how do we write about the stories that precede us, or the histories that we come from, when perhaps when we actually personally don't experience them, or even if we do, when they involve other stories that are tangential or related and not necessarily ours. And so I think that's when we have to we each personally have our own sort of framework, and that our own kind of ethics of remembering and then relaying that as well. And I think we're constantly negotiating that.
It's interesting you said like ethics of remembering and relaying. They're almost like two separate things that are needed, I suppose. Do we have any questions from our lovely group? I mean, don't feel like you have to. You can also just go up and chat to Alizia afterwards. But I did
and have a cupcake. There's so many.
Have a cupcake. But in case there are any, burning ones that people are sort of sitting on, feel free to raise your hand. And if not, I was hoping you would read a last poem for us before we finish.
Sure. I would love to read a last poem. It's the first poem in the collection, and I read it a lot, so I'm sorry lots of you have probably heard it, but I also really like it. Faded. Say the word dark translates to how I fold my body like a fig against a stippled moon. Pull a string of sorrows from my mouth. Remind me that I am not a swan. I am a long night of rain with my mother's eyes. Hold my thusby to my heart. Imagine we are elk walking into tall grass. This dream is the sky opening. This dream is a river of faces. This dream is all of the pine trees replaced with smoke. I call out to the water, and the wind scatters my thoughts, fashions distances within me. I call out Allah. If I look up, I see a ghost in the canopy. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yeah, that was such a treat. Thank you so much. Do come up and, if you haven't yet, get the book. If you like, get it signed from Alicia. We don't have like a signing table as such, so I don't think. So go and just, just bring it to Alicia.